let's begin. Enormous effort and persistence, and I would even use the word courage, went into General Dallaire reaching Montreal to share his experiences with us this morning. And I don't want to waste a minute on introductions beyond laying out the agenda that will describe General Dallaire's program with us this morning. First, I want to say, General Dallaire, we're extremely grateful for the effort you put into getting here. And I know you did an entire morning lecture on how you got here, but I know you're not going to do that either, because you have even more important things to share with us. The hybrid version of the interview that I was going to do yesterday with General Dallaire is going to be preceded by 30 minutes, which Shaun Michaud is going to talk about some very important work that's going on, particularly focusing on child soldiers. And at the end of that 30-minute discussion, I'm going to ask him some questions. You'll have a chance to ask him some questions as well. And we'll have a discussion, sort of imagining we're sitting in the living room somewhere, which is not hard with our speaker this morning. I give you General Roméo Dallaire.
Good morning, all, and thank you for being so flexible with the schedule to permit me to be here to be able to speak this morning. Part of your schedule also had Dr. Shelley Whitman, who was going to give the real version of what I'm going to say in the bridge fashion on the link between child soldiers and genocide and mass atrocities. She couldn't get here, so she finally was able to make it to Halifax, to Dalhousie University, where she had things that had to be done today, so I'm afraid could not be with us. I am going to probably do what my Marine Corps friends taught me, and that is I'm going to power talk for 30 minutes on this link, and then as Dr. Chalk has indicated, we'll sit down and have a little bit of a bull session together, all of us. I'm coming fresh off of two conferences which had significant impacts on me personally, but also on the work that we're doing internationally in regards to genocide prevention or mass atrocities and abuses of human rights. First one was in The Hague, where the Global Institute for Peace with the American Institute for National Archives and also the Holocaust Museum out of Washington held a conference with as many as the big players they could to review Rwanda. Everybody from Iqbal Aliza through many members of the Security Council, through deputy, through journalists, through ambassadors who were on the ground, to people in the White House, journalists and academics. So 54 of us sat in a square and tried to beat the living daylights out of each other on who's to blame. But in fact, it was a review of what happened in order to produce, we hope, a report that would be helpful in the realm of prevention. And that's the aim of the exercise. It was part of genocide prevention, prevention of mass atrocities. And the other one was last week, the British panel discussions, both at ministerial level and at working group level, and at NGO level, because they had what they called a sidebar, and the NGO community built a massive endeavor of getting a lot of people to come and talk in and discuss on the subject. It was quite an experience. And that also is part of the more generic concept of prevention of mass atrocities and mass abuse of human rights, is recognizing women as a dominant element within that, both in the solution but also in the target. The target being the exploitation and the use of this new weapon called rape, but rape in a deliberate instrument of conflict to create horror and ultimately fear, and so break down the social structure and give those in many of these civil wars and conflicts the opportunity to gain advantage on the population and move the way they want. So it was an extraordinary effort on looking at how do we curtail that weapon that's now a deliberate instrument in conflict. This is no more the story of the rogue soldiers on the side. This is no more the era of just boys will be boys type of horrible construct of the past and the macho realm of the past, which is still too available in many of the male-dominated societies around the world. But it is now recognized not only by the International Criminal Court as torture and as a crime against humanity, and we can thank maybe the Rwandan Tribunal for bringing that to the fore, but it is recognized as a weapon that has to be neutralized, and that we must find ways to do that. So those two conferences bring me here after the sessions I had out west over the last couple of days in the realm of genocide again, but of mass atrocities. What I want to talk about is the second sort of weapon of this era for a few minutes. A weapon that has become a deliberate instrument of establishing control over civilian populations, which ultimately those who are trying to perpetrate these crimes are trying to do in order to build their power base. One must remember as an example that when the extremists in Rwanda moved so much of the population, in fact over 3.9 million people, although they were cleansing, is the term that one of them even used, as they were going, they were moving the population into internally displaced camps or settings, and also refugee camps, in order to build their power base for the future, the negotiation base. For they felt that they would be in a position to be able to influence whatever the outcome might be of the fighting in the Civil War by having a large portion of the population under their control. And in so doing, also gained and maintained control in both the internally displaced camps and the refugee camps for a long period of time, with the hope of being able to establish that argument. So we're talking about weapons that are used to establish a power base for people who have ulterior motives. And no matter what angle we tend to look at, as an example again, the Rwandan genocide and the fact that it was ethnic-based, and if we're looking at the Central African Republic, which is now religious-based and is on the border of moving to genocide, the ultimate aim is power. The people who are doing it is for power. And what comes out of this is the fact that they don't want to share power. People are ready to go beyond any realm of logic and of responsibility, go beyond humanitarian law of armed conflict, any of the conventions and any of the ultimate protocols that could be in existence. They're prepared to throw all that away in order to build their power base, and ultimately then move on from there with whatever they consider to be the element of their society should be running the country or should be the essence of their society. So they're eliminating people because they want power and they don't want to share it. And I think sometimes when we're looking at the mother, we're forgetting that in essence that's what that elite was going after. And that ultimately ended up by the genocide scenario. Is that new? No, it's just the fact that I think too often we are reticent of actually going to that element and saying the extent of ruthlessness that the people who are conducting these exactions are willing to go through is because they see the prize being so much higher, meaning power. And that prize actually blinds them to any constraint in the era which we seem to have stumbled into of actually applying many of the international laws and conventions that are there that should be, in fact, influencing them not to go down that route because we do have finally the International Criminal Court and we can, more than before, I believe, we can, in fact, fight that impunity. That's the backdrop I wanted to enunciate on this exercise and bringing you into one component of this in order to be in, I hope, in simpatico with your work and your research in the realm of mass atrocities and genocide prevention, and that is the tools that we have to actually do something about it. And one of the most fundamental tools of our era is the introduction of responsibility to protect. I was, a couple of years ago, the keynote speaker in Munster at the Westphalia Annual Conference, where I had the pleasure with Dr. Chak, we were there, to argue that sovereignty is no more an absolute. And to make some people realize that we've actually created a revolution in the construct of the Westphalia concept of nation states. We actually, for the first time, took on and internationally recognized that sovereignty is no more an absolute. That is to say, sovereignty of the state is no more an absolute. Because we're pushing for sovereignty of the individual as an absolute. That's I think, the far more progressive move that came out of that. But not to let people forget that what we're after, we're after the fact that sovereignty is no more an absolute element beyond all the constructs of humanitarian law, law of armed conflict, and any of the human rights principles that are existing. So, that, to me, means the door is open. So why aren't we using it? Why did we bring in 2005 this extraordinary tool and we seem to be so reticent in wanting to apply it and how to apply it? And so being a soldier and a senior officer, the first thing I'm going to warn you is that I can't give a briefing without about 100 slides. So you better be ready for that. However, I'm going to not do that many, I just got a couple, but I will talk through them to give you reinforcement, I hope, in doing that to the points I want to raise. In regards to operationalizing R2P and bringing it into a very specific focus. That Francis Deng and Kofi Annan in 2007 in Kenya could argue that, hey, we did use R2P effectively and prevented that country from going into massive chaos, and in fact even prevented those genocide radio stations from continuing. So there is within the realm out there that construct that can be used and has fleetingly been used in the internal catastrophic failures within some societies. However, how do we get it to be, in fact, a norm? How do we get it to be acceptable? Remembering that even within the UN, you've got a USG who's working on genocide prevention, but you also got a USG who's working on R2P, and they can't seem to bring them both together, which in itself is quite an interesting argument. I mean, Ed Luck, who was the R2P guy, couldn't get a salary. He was tolerated, but he couldn't get he could never get a salary because the Fifth Committee could never approve his position to be salarized. However, we did have a salary and a construct and an office well structured for Francis Deng in genocide prevention. The fact that we can't marry the two under one head, that we have to be so double-headed, is an indication that this thing has got some rules and some problems ahead. And so you can't take the whole thing and try to push it. So why not try to focus it? And that's, I think, what Ban Ki-moon has been trying to articulate, is that why not go narrow but deep? Why not, in fact, move into a specific arena and start, and the term I would like to use is attriting the reticence of applying a responsibility to protect. So that is to say, by going into very specific areas and pushing them to the limit in identifying them as tools, as elements of a catastrophic scenario, and how do we curtail that from happening. And this brings me to the construct of what could be some of these narrow arenas. And the way that I would like to present this one is by indicating that ultimately we're in the business of trying to prevent these things from happening. We spend a lot of time and a lot of money on picking up the pieces afterwards, and reconstruction, and all the nation building, and attempting reconciliation, and so on. But we have still not demonstrated the courage or the ability to intervene in a proactive way to prevent things from happening. And at times, we do go in when the scenario is being played out, but that is often either too late and with too few resources to really influence it in a significant way. So much of the catastrophe has already been initiated, and the long-term effects of that will be felt already by simply thinking that we can go in once the scenario has been initiated, and maybe we can curtail it or at least try to stop it. And that has proven to be less than effective. Syria is totally ineffective, and I would say Libya was half-assed effective. The day that Gaddafi said, I am going to crush these cockroaches, was the day boots had to be on the ground. Not aircraft in the air, but boots on the ground, to separate the civilian population from the Gaddafi forces and to make that line a line of us being able to really demonstrate protection of civilians and permit them to be able to reconstruct what they want for the future without them having to fight, without them having to bleed, without them having to import weapons and all kinds of other assets that would ultimately destabilize them, and still does today, by the fact that some led more than others and feel they have more of a position on power. And how do you reconstruct after a scenario like that? And sure, regime change happened, but nobody really ran the show. The UN, question NATO was supporting and implementing, but it had no responsibility to talk to the Security Council. And the Security Council had no strategic ability to talk to it. It had no command and control capability, had no planning capability. So when the force commander of the NATO forces in discussions with me says, I never talked to the UN, I talked through NATO, and I expected NATO to be informing the Security Council as a body, maybe, but we thought that the big players, the permanent five, or the three of the permanent five, would actually be talking to the Security Council. To our surprise, is the three permanents who are part of NATO didn't talk to the Security Council, did not provide information, and so the Security Council was running blind in this exercise, and that permits, I think, the Russians and Chinese to overstep the argument that using R2P could be worse because we'll end up with a worse project, including the thing going awry and even regime change. So with this, the aim to me in prevention is early warning. The problem is that what is early warning? I mean, this is a helicopter flying over an active volcano. What is early warning in an active volcano? How much technology and science do we have to really predict when this thing is going to go catastrophic and the impacts of that? And so I would argue that right now we don't have even a real solid definition of what the early warning parameters can be. We don't grasp what can be the early warning. I will give you an example. I am now participating in writing the terms of reference of the new Genocide Prevention Advisory Board for the Secretary General. And in there, we are arguing that the advisory board should be made up of persons who are field deployable, meaning that we could go in way sooner and influence the situation without carrying the UN flag and all that, but in fact being a long-range patrol, being an in-depth patrol, being one that can, in fact, influence without carrying too much of the political weight or the stigmas of the UN. But there have been, of course, cases in the past in which we've seen that we didn't have the tools and we went catastrophic. Certainly, as you see on the slide, we didn't have our 2P. Well, it came after. Whether we want to use it, well, we didn't have it, so we couldn't use it, of course. And did we really want to prevent, or did we hope for the best? And in fact, did we minimize what it was going to be? As was so often said in the first weeks of modern genocide, this is just a tribal problem, and it will peter out once they've had their taste of blood. Well, it didn't, to the surprise of many. On the contrary, it persisted and turned into a genocide. So, historically, we didn't have many of these tools to be able to apply R2P, to even think of applying it. Now, look at South Sudan. We've got R2P. We've got some of the potential tools that we've got. However, do we want to apply it? Is the will there? Do we actually want to implement some of the mandates that are coming out? But one of the interesting angles of that willingness to apply the mandates is the Security Council Resolution 2155. For South Sudan, it says it essentially changed the United Nations mission of the South Sudan mandate to be the protection of civilians, and actually citing R2P rhetoric within it. And so, what I find most disconcerting is that we are using some of the elements of R2P, but we never want to use the term. And secondly, we're using them, but not in a preventive mode, as we should be. We're using them whether or not we're going to the in extremist scenario is, do we want to use military force or not? And we spend a lot of time on those 6 factors of assessment of whether we want to use the military capabilities under R2P, and in fact spend very little on the other pillars of what R2P is, of which I believe the prevention of recruitment of children in a conflict to be used as weapons is very much part of the construct of all the pillars of R2P, and in particular, the whole dimension of trying to bring about an ability to get decisions early by providing an early warning instrument and by eliminating that instrument from being able to be used to implement it. And that is as one of those going deep, very narrow ways of getting and tricking those who want to create genocide and mass atrocities by preventing the use of child soldiers.
So I'll just put a footnote to that. Yesterday I spoke about Victor Klemperer. That was when you were stuck in some airport or another place. And Victor Klemperer lived in Dresden during the Holocaust. That was where he was based. What liberated Victor Klemperer, a German Jew, and professor of linguistics and French literature, from the imprisonment of his home that was marked as shared with Jew, was the raid on Dresden, the Allied bombing raid, because then he could go out into the street, tear off his yellow star, and say that his papers had been destroyed in the bombing. So Dresden weaves itself through this workshop in some interesting ways. Now my second question is closer to the work you're doing now, or at least the more obvious work. I think you're still working on what you gave us to answer the first question, and we all understand that very well now. When you and I recommend to governments that they focus on preventing mass atrocities, much more than they presently do, we are asking governments to divert money and other resources from their domestic political agendas. What do you believe are the most important arguments we should be using to help them justify channeling money into saving the lives of foreigners?
The statement that stays with me brutally was by a representative of a major power in the first week of the Rwandan genocide. When he repeated what others had said before, he said that, you know, we're not going to come here, we're not going to recommend that we give you any assets because there's nothing here. There's no value to us, there's no strategic resources, it's not in our self-interest. But then he added, he said, and on top of that, the only thing that is here are human beings, and there's too many of them anyways. So we're populated. So when we're looking at now nearly 25 years in this new era, the post-Cold War era, of all these failing states and employee nations of massive abuses of human rights and genocide, we still see coming to the fore the argument of self-interest. There's no doubt that they are facing, from a political perspective, short-term objectives, because that's what we hold them accountable to. Right? Tomorrow morning's Globe and Mail situations. They are in constant fear of taking risks, so they're risk averse, so they won't go into something that they can't get a feel for what the results could be, and that they can be tangible, that they can sell it, that they can sustain their political capital by having done this. And so going into an arena such as prevention is just too diffuse for them. So they're very tactical, they're very short-term, and so they're very tactical, meaning risk-averse. I don't want to test this because I really don't know what the immediate results or accountable results can be. Short-term, tactical, and I think the other element that is that they are in fear of the nation suffering at the expense of something that's beyond the grasp of what they believe the population can handle. Meaning things like fear of casualties. That some of us die in a foreign land for something that is so diffused as a civil war in a place where there's nothing for us, just doesn't seem to be able to carry the day for them to be able to stand up in front of the family, let alone the rest of the population, say it's worth it, that we will spill blood of our youth to help others because that is a worthy cause. There's an inability to bring that argument to the fore. So how do you overcome those realities? Even with 25 years of so many examples, and in fact some of the tools, it keeps coming right back to us. Well, I would argue that we can't just do it on the security side. We can't just do it on a grander scale of humanism, human rights. Although I would argue that the younger generation is probably going to grasp that better than others because they are already without borders and they are already global with the social communications. And they live the world in real time. We live the world in history. They live the world in real time. I mean, they're texting real time the rest of the world. They'll be Skyping the world soon. So they are far more capable of handling. When they talk about environment, they talk about the globe. They don't talk about the river back behind us. They comprehend the world. So they're going to be different, and I think that we can build on that. But the areas that haven't been counteracted or exposed or brought into this argument are beyond the pure politics and beyond the pure security. And that is the construct of our societies and our economic well-being and what makes us tick. And so we've got to get other new players into this exercise. And as Dr. Chalk talking, the economic side of these conflicts, through natural resources, like the coltan and stuff like that in the Kiwis, as an example. And the other group, or the other element is not necessarily the NGO world individually and how they can do it, but is how do you build a coalition of power within the NGO world? That, I don't think, has been brought to the argument. We've got all kinds of NGOs involved, international, local, and so on. They're often at each other's throats. We've got a colleague here from Médecins Sans Frontières, but sometimes I call the Ayatollahs of the NGO world in their sort of positions they take at times. But there are often at odds with each other and in competition with each other because of the dependency of resources, of course. And so I believe that part of our ability to respond to this is to influence the NGO world to coalesce into a power base. That they be using the term power, they be using the term of constructing that capability to be able to influence public opinion and policy. To do that, not only must they coalesce, but they got to move away from the anecdotal framework in which they work from, or the experiential framework, and they got to go into a far more intellectually rigorous and metrics-based argumentation. And that means a significant shift in how they go from I'm very much involved by heart and soul to here are the gruesome facts, and here are the data, and here's how we believe it should be dissected. So I truly believe that the business world, getting them engaged to influence policy, and because it is good business all around. It could be win-win for both locally and around. But the other side is not to sort of poo-poo the NGO world or know that they're there and they're noise and that they are fringe, but in fact turn them into a power structure for humanity. And that means some of them making a major shift in how they think they should be acting. I think they've got to get their boots dirty into the power constructs in a far more concrete way than they are, taking snaps at it, and dabs at it, and pot shots at it, and continuously being able to be marginalized by the political powers. I think the era now, they've got the communications and the ability to coalesce. It's just a matter of, do they want to actually play together to create that synergy of power? That's my short answer on that one.
Our colleagues at this workshop are people who want to make a difference in preventing mass atrocities. That's why they're here. They want to help to build a better world. Based on your life experiences, what do you think are the most important skills and the most important knowledge they need to achieve the goal of making this a better world, preventing mass atrocities? What knowledge and what skills that they may not currently possess should they strive to master and to use in their work?
The first thing that comes to mind is you got to have guts. You're into a realm that needs courage. sustain the effort in regards to convincing that societies, because of their frictions, don't have to go into catastrophic conflict and ultimately even mass atrocities and genocide. There is a need beyond the intellectual aspects that calls for you having actually the guts to want to commit to this argument with a passion that is reflective of the seriousness of the subject. I spoke a few days ago to some media, and I said, you know, in fact, I even repeated it in the Senate by going on the speech. What happens in Syria and Central African Republic and Myanmar and Nigeria now going on in this massive recruiting drive, the abduction of these girls and so on is not for them just to make money. I mean, they are recruiting. They're building up their ranks because they also took away a hell of a lot of boys too. So what's happening there to us who've been in the field is not a new story. It's not a reportage. It's not you know, an event. To us, it's reality. You know, I can hear them scream. I can smell the bodies rotting. I can hear the weapons. I can hear the machetes and the impacts of that. I can see the thousands moving in rain and mud. I can see women dying by the road as they have been raped and mutilated. I can see the old people falling and being trampled at the food distribution points. I can see them dying and looking at you with their bewildered eyes, saying, what the hell happened? How did we end up with it? That's reality. The question is how do you bring that reality to our day-to-day reality? And that it not be a story, not be an event, not be just a front page for a couple of days and then we're off to do something. That it not be sort of CNN history, which is nothing beyond last week. So the intellectual rigor of dissecting this, the skill sets of being able to present it, articulate it, and argue it are all essential tools, of course. But there's got to be an inner flame that brings this into a reality. You've got to actually feel what's going on. But we are talking about human beings. We're not talking about buying another truck. If I need to argue how I need a new truck for the Canadian Army because the old one is rusting out and so on, I can be very clinical and very dispassionate, and I can be very engineering, and I can be very project management about it. And I'll get that truck, and I'll get the hundreds of millions I need for the truck. But when I try to argue a personnel policy, or I try to argue a human dimension, that can't be articulated in that dispassionate, number-crunching way, purely by that deficiency that's overtly evident, then it becomes much more difficult to sell. And so, the only way I believe that you can provide yourself with a force multiplier of what your intellectual abilities are, what your skill sets that you have, is by how do you make what is happening there reality. Making it that people will actually hear the people dying and being slaughtered. That they actually smell it. They actually taste it. In Rwanda, it got so bad that the odors and so on actually entered the pores of the skin. He'd wash, and yet he'd still smell the decaying and the destruction. And so that's how you, I think, can make your arguments more real. Some will say, well, yeah, that's purely shock effect, and the media are avoiding that as not wanting to overstate the case. I would argue that it's not shock effect. I argue that that's reality. I mean, the father in Syria who kills his wife and his two daughters because he's fearful that they're about to be raped. I mean, how do you handle the moral and ethical dilemmas that creates, let alone the legal ones? And how do you say that because they're in that construct, because of their societal, because of their culture, because of their religion, he found himself doing that? How do we let that happen? And how do we let that degenerate to that point? So I don't know more than saying to people, you got to get your boots dirty. So you got to get your boots dirty in the field, and you've got to bring that passion with you, and you've got to make it not a dispassionate engineering problem, but a very human, a very realistic event that is ongoing and that we're permitting to happen. I'll end it with the following. I'm trying to argue with my colleagues that, as an example, not sending already a couple thousand Canadian troops to assist in Central African Republic is aiding and abetting the slaughter of Central African people. Inaction on our part, who could have a significant influence on the ground, is aiding and abetting that slaughter. So that may be very crass. By not using the potential we have in those scenarios is putting that blood on our hands. Unless you can bring that to the fore, you might not be able to have time to argue all the other intellectual dimensions of it. So I would end by saying that I don't think we shock people enough. I don't think we scare the shit out of people. And I'll bring it very close to home for here in Canada. In 1990, we had an insurrection here in Oka, where the Aboriginal community, First Nation community, blocked some of the bridges on the South Shore because some idiots wanted to put a golf course on our Aboriginal lands. We sent in the police. One of them was killed, and they pulled back. And in our country, when the police failed, then the army goes in. And we have no option but to win, because if we don't, then there's nothing behind us. So we must win. Well, the first thing we did is we deployed 3,500 troops with artillery. So an overwhelming force was made very heavy, including air defense systems and all the rest. So we put overwhelming force, then we negotiated and we said, get the women, the elderly, the pregnant women and children out of the exercise. You guys want to hold up, fine, but let's get them out because they could be, if someone were killed by a mistake or something, it would create enormous ramifications and the whole thing will go nuts, which they agreed. So we made a convoy of pregnant women, because it's a matriarchal system, the women want to stay, pregnant women, elderly, and children. This convoy is making its way through the town, South Shore. Normal French-Canadian, English-Canadian community, just all of them. And they knew what it was, they knew everything was well known for. So as the convoy is entering the village, people were, of course, along the route. And they were mad, because they had to do 2 hours a day more of going, commuting to get to work. And it's summertime and it's hot, so they're mad and they're yelling and so on. Well, we have footage of people at the other end of the village, of the town, as a comment, who not only were throwing stones and bricks, but throwing big rocks, and in their face and in their actions, they are reflecting that they want to kill the people inside those cars. They want to kill them, and they're damn near dead. They created some injuries. And they knew they were elderly people, they were children and pregnant women. And they were ready to kill. And that's here. And they were doing it because they had to do 2 hours more a day of commuting. So when we sort of look at these countries that have far more in-depth problematics and we sort of Google them, I think we don't shock people enough to say that, hey, we ain't that far if we really push us. And that there's a more sympathical concern that we should have in regards to that. And that's the shorter version too.
Between 2010 and 2012, I had the privilege of being a UN consultant on genocide prevention. And I never forgot what the person there in this office told me when we organized a meeting on genocide prevention in the UN, in the headquarters. We never had Russian, Chinese, or Arabic representatives. So, you know, it brings me to a thought that, in fact, this genocide term itself is a Western creation, or European invention. The word, as you know, has been created by Rather Lemkin. And I'd just like to have your advice about, well, more generally, the responsibility to protect doctrine as well. How do you think it's possible to make this country, which is a large part of the world, more concerned about genocide prevention and the responsibility to protect doctrine? Thank you.
Je suis tellement content d'avoir des questions si faciles. My arguments start from, first of all, I say that the future of humanity is because we are working for it to continue to strive to continue to enhance itself and not survive. That is to say that I believe that humanity is looking to continue to go forward in its positive sense in its evolution and not a state of survival. So I am not of a Darwinian philosophy that fundamentally the human being, we're all there in sort of conflicting situation against each other and one wanting to be taking advantage above the other. I do not believe that human beings are of that construct. Ergo, I argue that one day, it might take a couple of centuries, we will not revert to conflict because of the frictions of our differences, that we will have found other means to work within the construct of humanity. Taking that, some might even call Pollyanna perspective, taking that perspective, I believe that the construct of human rights, I believe the terms, like you just said, genocide, are not a Western construct. I believe they're a humanity construct. I believe that there is something above all these other sort of descriptives of what we are different. And that we've been able to pierce into that with a few things, like human rights, like genocide. We've been able to break into that higher plane of argument that is above whatever sort of reason by objectivity, we hope, and intellectual rigor, but still influenced by our cultural and geographical framework, and be it ethnic, religious, or whatever, tribal, whatever. I believe that we've been able to punch into some of those higher plane arguments. And that if people are arguing that such things as human rights, genocide, and so on, are Western arguments, I believe they are totally and grossly in error of comprehending that we've been able to a bit break into a higher plane of humanity and of its argument of what it is, of its existence, and what its ambitions are. So the question is how do you get, as you've indicated, the Russians, Chinese, for example, to be participatory and to engage in such a higher plane of thought? I can only argue that it is by engagement, by attrition, by continued arguing, that we are not introducing a Christian, Western, Northern, white argumentation in regards to advancement of humanity, that we are actually breaking into the essence of what humanity is, and that we've been able to do a bit of it, and that we're trying to bring more into that higher plane. And I think that's the only way we can do it, because any other argument will be countered by a whole, be it religious, cultural, or whatever, or political, will give you an argument. So I'm hoping that more people will argue that higher plane reference than the more facile excuse that, oh geez, you know, that's a white European Christian sort of perspective. I think that's just a real easy way of copping out to facing that higher argument.
Thank you.
I am curious as to your thoughts on the effectiveness of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, as well as the optional protocol of children in armed conflict, as well as there's a lot of evidence emerging that the children's knowledge of children's rights is possibly an effective tool in genocide prevention, and that in the 3 keys of the convention, you know, the protection, provision, there's participation, which participation is kind of the weaker key of the 3. How you feel perhaps that these, that the knowledge of their rights could perhaps help even with, you know, being a child soldier, and that the misconception is that if children know about their rights young, that they will become demanding, and the actual opposite has been found to be true. So I suppose,
yeah, child rights and empowering children. I remember at a conference there was a gentleman who was a well-known journalist who wrote the famous words for George Bush Jr., the axis of evil, David Frum. At a conference, we were discussing child rights at the table as a sidebar, and he absolutely went beside himself in arguing that he does not believe in child rights because he doesn't want to be brought to court by his children. So, this is a very smart person arguing that. And
yeah,
so,
very smart mother, too.
Yeah, particularly, yes. So, the Convention of Children and Child Rights and their engagement and so on. I think there are 2 elements out there that will give us long-term results. And let me qualify that long-term right off the bat. When I decided to stop trying to kill myself, it was because I finally realized that having short-term objectives were simply destroying me. Because the stuff I was wanting to work in just didn't work short-term. And so I brought a reference. When I was working on Army equipment, acquiring it, it would take 20 years to bring a weapon system in. and add another 10 years of research and development. So sometimes 30 years to bring a brand new capability in. And I have officers working for me for 3 years and come to me and say, I've wasted 3 years because it hasn't moved. And I said, no. I said, there's all kinds of staff work you've done, you don't feel it moving. But I said, you're working diligently every year because it's only going to take 30 years. If you weren't doing that, it'll take 31 years or 32 years. And so you're part of a longer construct. To me, all of what we're talking about is a longer construct. So if you're into this business because you think you're going to have it resolved over the next decade or two, you're in the wrong business. We're into decades and decades of sustained effort. Women have got to come to the equality of men. And empowering women is crucial in breaking many of the cultural, even religious constructs that are out there, that are preventing us from being able to look at human rights and the rights of humanity, even bring in some of the rule of law dimensions that we believe in. And in so doing, we are curtailing humanity because we are fundamentally keeping women out of the big game in too many arenas of the world. Empowerment of women is critical to advancing child rights. The second thing is education. Unless you build generations upon generations of objective, intellectually rigorous education that does articulate a sense of values of humanity in the generic sense, not in a religious sense as such, I don't think you'll build the depth of this. So we have frameworks, we've got all the words and so on, as I've said before, but how to apply it seems weak. And our Cartesian near-term sense of objectives and success and failure are preventing us from taking the real efforts of moving such things as child rights into the future by saying we're going to attrit this philosophy that has no recognition for the rights of the child. And the way we're going to attrit it is by empowering women and by a very intellectually rigorous education of the youth as the generation to generation. And that can take decades, that can take generations. So what? What if it does take 200 years? What the hell's 200 years over the thousands of years we've been beating the shit out of each other? So that's okay to take that construct. And I believe that the revolution of communications that is now creating generations like the under 25 now that are without borders, that is going to accelerate. It might not be as fast, but it's going to accelerate the ability of the youth to engage, and that the elders are going to show more deference to the youth because the youth are coming in with more powerful arguments and more knowledge and much broader perspective. So we've got a technological revolution that's I think, assisting to move the fundamental changes that we need into accepting child rights and the rights of women. And that, the two of them together will help, but it's still long term. So you just got to keep at it and at it. Empowering women and education of the young will empower them. And with the revolution of communications, particularly technology, they will not be constrained by borders. And I mean borders far more than just nation-state borders.